Hi, everyone. My name is Shanti Vemuri. I'm an associate professor of radiology at Mayo Clinic, Rochester, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about my professional journey so far and what my program focuses currently and the problems that I'm working on. I have a little bit of an unusual journey in trying to find what I really wanted to do. I was really interested in math growing up, and I knew that I wanted to do engineering for my bachelor's, which is what I did with focus on signal processing and electrical engineering. And then I went on to do my master's and PhD, and I was really intrigued by how medical imaging could be leveraged to look at the brain. So I spent a lot of time at University of Utah studying the nuts and bolts of brain imaging and how the acquisition and processing of images happens. And it was a really exciting time because I got to know that the amount of information that you could get from these brain images is incredible. And so I really searched for a program across the country where I could focus on a clinical application and learn how we could apply technologies for early detection, diagnosis, and treatment. So I found a position for studying imaging of neurodegenerative diseases at Mayo Clinic Rochester under Dr. Clifford Jack back in 2006. And after that, I really wanted to see if I could go off in my own direction, trying to understand how pathology happens and how some individuals are able to perform cognitively really well, even though they have a head full of pathology. So this concept is known as resilience, and I wanted to understand how resilience is possible and how people are able to cope with pathology. So I applied for a K99R00 grant. This is a grant by the National Institute of Health, which promotes individuals trying to go on a pathway to independence. And it's a beautiful mechanism where the focus on the first 2 years is on training, getting your skills up. And the last 3 years is trying to pave you into an independent pathway where the focus is on writing R01s and trying to establish your own program. So this was a great way for me to try and work in a new area. And then subsequently, I got a faculty position at Mayo Clinic, where I'm currently at, and really enjoy the research that I'm doing. So, with that being said about my background, I wanted to give you what my program focuses on. So, my program is focused on PET and MRI imaging technologies and how do you improve acquisition, processing, and quantification so you can really measure early changes due to aging and pathology. So, why is it important to measure these early changes? Because we can then focus on lifestyle factors that can be leveraged to prevent these changes. So this is a very broad area, as you know, and you might have seen at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Day. But my specific questions that I work on are threefold. The first question that I work on is there is Alzheimer's disease, but there's another important axis of aging, which is cerebrovascular disease. So the goal of a first group of projects are how do you define cerebrovascular disease really well? Right now, we don't have treatments for Alzheimer's disease pathologies, but we can do something about preventing cerebrovascular disease by controlling cardiovascular and metabolic issues. So, defining an axis and preventing changes in the brain related to cerebrovascular diseases are very important. That's the first problem I work on. The next two problems that I work on are the problems of resistance and resilience. So, what do you mean by resistance? Resistance is the concept where individuals are trying to avoid pathologies. If you look at this graph, you see a subject B who's unimpaired and cognitively unimpaired and does not have a lot of Alzheimer's disease pathologies and cerebrovascular disease pathologies, even though they're older. So, how is the subject able to uh, avoid pathologies? The other concept that I work on is how individuals are able to cope with pathologies. So the participant A, who's unimpaired, and participant C, who's impaired, have the main difference between both the individuals is that participant A has abilities to cope with pathologies or resilient to pathological changes. So one of the questions that we ask and answer in our lab are, how could you be like subject A, where you have a head full of amyloid or a lot of cerebrovascular disease changes, but are able to cope with pathologies? So these are the broad questions that we work on, and I'd love to hear from you and the questions you may have about my research career as well as professional development that I've undergone so far.